everyone, and welcome to my video here about how to interpretate map evidence for longer 30-mark questions, or indeed longer questions at Leaving and Junior Cert. So we're going to pick the Dungarvan map, or I'm going to have a look at the Dungarvan map here, which last came up in 2014. And this is a great map because there's lots of evidence on the Dungarvan map to account for things like the development of the town, economic activity found within the town, the development of tourism, or the development of an industrial location within the map area provided. As always, it would be important to give six-figure grid references to back up your evidence. So if I am saying that this is a tourist location and that there's a tourist office in this town, it would be important to give a six-figure grid reference, and you can check out my video there on how to give six-figure grid references. After that, it's up to you to develop and interpret the evidence. You can interpret and develop the evidence whatever way you see fit. As long as there's some evidence that points to your development being possibly true, then there is a bit of leeway given to how you develop the evidence that you see on the map. So first little bit we're going to have a look at here is we're going to look at the development of economic activity in Dungarvan town. So first of all, we're going to have a look at the development of economic activity in the Dungarvan area. Now, this might be most useful for leaving certificate students, especially those of you who are studying economic geography, as this would be one of the 30-mark questions that comes up almost every single year in relation to taking map evidence and developing it out into a full long answer. Okay, so what kind of evidence do we see here of economic activities? Well, first of all, we know that economic activities can be primary, secondary, or tertiary. So let's have a look. What are kind of the pieces of evidence here that could suggest to us that there are primary activities taking place in this area? Well, first of all, I can see that the landscape is nice and flat. How do I know the landscape is nice and flat? Well, I know that you've got the green color, and I know you've got the contour lines that are spaced wide apart. Oops. So I know that the land here is flat, and that the land here that's flat outside the town could possibly be used for farming. Okay, now there's no symbol or anything for farming in your Ordnance Survey map, but it is reasonable to believe that the agricultural or the rural areas outside of the town could possibly be used for farming practices. So the land here is nice and flat in this part of the map. I know that because of the green color. I know that because of things like the spot heights, okay? And I know because of things like the widely spaced contour lines. All of those tell me here that the land in this part of the Dungarvan map would be possibly suitable to farming, okay? However, that's not the case throughout the entirety of the map. If we go up here to the north side of the map, we can see that the landscape changes. You can see that you've got very steep land. The land is very high. Okay, the contour lines are packed very close together. This tells me that farming might be particularly strong in this part of the map. Also, I can see as a type of primary economic activity that there are lots and lots of coniferous plantations on this area. So this tells me that farming in this part of the map is not particularly good, but it also tells me that forestry is particularly suited here, which is another type of primary economic activity. And finally, then, you can see that this is a coastal location in Dungarvan. You can see that you've got boating activities here. You can see you've got a slip. You can see you've got a pier. All of these things could be possible evidence that fishing is an economic activity that takes place offshore in this area, in this region. So because you've got evidence of things like this, it would be reasonable to assume that fishing is an economic activity that takes place in this area. Now, as with all primary economic activities, they feed into the development of secondary economic activities. Why? Because farming, forestry, fishing, they all provide raw materials for manufacturing. What kind of evidence is there here to suggest that this town in Dungarvan would be a good place or a possible place for manufacturing to have developed? Well, first of all, you can see that you've got perhaps a large workforce in the area. How do I know that? Well, I know that I've got a large young workforce in the area because I can see that there are a number of schools in the area. So this tells me that I have a young population. I have a big population because there are so many of them. So this tells me that the population here are young and that they're close by, because you want to build schools in areas where you have a high population. I also can deduce that there's perhaps a number of housing estates here. Tournore, Duxpool, Scahan, okay, could all be possibly different types of housing estates. How do I know this? Well, they've got the grey shaded in urban colour, which tells me they're in an urban area, but I can see that there's lots of roadways in and out of those areas, which would be typical as to what you would see in housing estates. And that combined with your schools would tell me that I've got a large young population in this area. This population could be used to act as a labour force and a market in any manufacturing that takes place here. You could, of course, develop your raw materials that we've mentioned from primary economic activities earlier on. That would suggest another strong reason as to why manufacturing would be suited to this area. Other examples are evidence of manufacturing perhaps being prevalent in this area would be, again, the boating activities, the slip, the pier. These three things could provide evidence that there may be some sort of deep water port or water port that you can have here, which would be useful for the import of raw materials and the export of finished products. There's no evidence on the map other than the fact that these things are present that would suggest this, but because there is evidence of these things on the map, it's reasonable for you to go and assume that the slip, the pier here could perhaps be used for industry. One of the other really big things here that the region has an advantage of in terms of manufacturing is the national primary roads. You've got the N72 and you've got the N25. The N25 goes all the way through Dungarvan, and in fact it acts almost as a tiny ring road that allows heavy goods, heavy traffic to move around the area without having to go through the town of Dungarvan itself. So by having this little ring road around the town of Dungarvan, it means that heavy trucks and heavy industry, they don't have to waste time traveling through small streets that have lots of traffic in them to get to where they need to go to. So it's going to reduce your costs. Secondly, there's the N72 and the N25, they both connect Dungarvan to Waterford City and to Cork City. So again, you'd have an increased market, an increased workforce, increased access to transportation such as Waterford Port at Bellevue, or Cork City Port, or perhaps Cork City Airport. So that would be additional attractive factors or developments that you could perhaps mention in regards to this. You've got lots of available land on the outskirts of the town that would have access to the N25 that would be maybe perhaps suitable locations for a factory to develop. Okay, so any of those areas labeled X would be good places for a factory to set up. They're on the outskirts of the town and the city, in this case Dungarvan, and they're on their transportation routes as well, so it would be really ideal places for them to set up. And finally, I suppose in regards to the development of manufacturing here, you have the services in the area. So manufacturing companies, factories, in other words, they're going to need various services. Post offices would be an indication that you've got good telecommunications in the area. They would also maybe suggest to us that there's banking done in the town. So the workers who work in the factory can get their wages sent to the post office. Deliveries perhaps that the factory might need could be facilitated by the post office as well. Any large or heavy industry would have plenty of access to fresh water from the Colligan River, which flows through Dungarvan town. So that might be of interest as a raw material to any manufacturing company that sets up here. Next, you can see here that you've got large transmission wires okay, that cross and traverse across the map here. This would be a good indication that heavy industry could set up here, because you have got the capacity to deliver large amounts of electricity to a big steel factory or whatever it might be. Okay, so that would be really useful as well. And finally, the final piece of evidence that I can see here that would be really good for manufacturing is the telecommunications tower that you can see in the top of the hill here at Crahan. This would indicate to me that there's good telephone reception, good telecommunications, perhaps good broadband and Wi-Fi in the area. And this would be really important for modern industries who need to be able to contact their suppliers and their market in order to deliver their goods and products to them. So these would be some of the reasons why manufacturing would be suited as an economic activity to develop here in Dungarvan town. And finally, the third economic activity that we should maybe perhaps pay attention to is tourism. You can see here clearly on the map that there is a tourist information office in Dungarvan, and again, it would be important to give a six-figure good reference for its location. But I can also see by the tourist office here that tourism is not maybe as developed as it should be, because the tourist office here is only open at certain times of the year. The tourist information office can give tourists an idea of things to do in the area, places to stay, places to eat. Perhaps something that might be of interest to historical tourists would be things like the priories, the castles, the mottes that are all close by, ring forts. Anything that's written in red here is considered what we call an antiquity, and they may be of interest to historical tourists. People maybe can go and get tours of these areas, buy souvenirs, and they can get all of this information from places like the Tourist Information Office. There is no hard evidence to say that these areas are fully standing or fully operational, or that they even give tours, but because they're on the map, you can assume that these would be perhaps attractive areas for tourists to go and visit. The next little service that I can see here in the middle of Dungarvan that's available is the Independent Youth Hostel. This again would tell me that tourism is important to the town as an economic activity, because, well, if people come to stay in the area, or to holiday in the area, they need somewhere to stay, and the Independent Holiday Hostel would be one such choice that maybe people might have. If you've got a holiday hostel like this, it's reasonable to assume that there are hotels, bed and breakfasts, Airbnbs in the town as well. And all of these things provide employment, both directly for people who work in these hotels and restaurants and whatever it might be, to indirect employment, people who work in the local laundrette, who might maybe clean the sheets and stuff like that, and the bedwear every week for these hotels and these guest houses. Okay, so that would be again further evidence that tourism might be an important economic activity in this area. To add to that, you can see here you've got a caravan and a campsite as well. Okay, they would be good indications that the tourism is a strong economic activity here. And again, it gives people a range or choice of places to stay. I can also see close by that I have golf clubs. In fact, I have two 18-hole golf courses. Again, this could be a type of activity that tourists might do when they come on holidays here, or indeed it might be the reason why the tourists travel here in the first place. So tourists that are into sport and recreation, perhaps they could would make use of those golf clubs. And again, they're probably going to pay their green fees, their membership, whatever it might be. They might buy some golf balls, they might rent golf clubs or golf cart, and all of that leads to the economic development of the town of Dungarvan. Okay. Next up, again, and coming back to it, boating activities that we can see here. We've got a slip and a pier. It's reasonable to assume that these boating activities might allow for things like water sports or sailing or tours of the area. And again, that would be a way in which the Dungarvan area can benefit from tourism. All right. And the final little bit of evidence that I can see here that might be quite an attractive tourist attraction to the area is the walk here in the forest here. So tourists that are into hiking or walking, they can take walks in these forested areas. There's parking close by, there's picnic close by. And again, that can be of interest to tourists who are into the outdoors and pursuing active recreational activity. Okay. So they would be some of the kind of pieces of evidence that would suggest that this area is reliant or does develop from the presence of tourism as a tertiary economic activity. So that's pretty much it then from me and my little video here about map evidence. I've kind of gone at it from the point of view of a leaving cert, doing the 30-mark question, but indeed any of this evidence here that I talked about could be used in junior cert as well. What is important is to give your piece of evidence, but then to develop it. What examiners do not want is they do not want a big long list of pieces of evidence and big long lists of grid references. It is much better to give maybe 2 or 3 pieces of evidence backed up by a grid reference, but each one of those pieces of evidence should be well developed. They should be backed up with why they might be important for the economic activity, be it primary, secondary, or tertiary, that you've been asked to talk about.